So thank you all for coming to the presentation today on Use Gen AI to Work Smarter, Not Harder, Key Takeaways from the STC Summit 2024. I'm Allison Gisinger, and I'm a senior technical writer at Appian. I have more than 10 years of experience in technical writing, and I'm the organizer for Write the Doc CC. I'm also the former secretary and vice president for the STC WDC BC. Oops, typo there. It's actually Washington, D.C. Baltimore chapter. Oh, no, that's right. Never mind. And then this is actually my 5th STC Summit that I've attended. I think I went to 2 that were virtual and 3 that were in person. And I always have a really good time just hanging out with people who are very like-minded and love talking about the words. So just to give you a brief overview of what the STC Summit is. It's a professional association dedicated to the advancement of technical communication across all fields. The summit is an annual conference for technical communication professionals, and STC stands for Society for Technical Communication. So STC is a really cool kind of professional association. It's the only real professional association I know of that we have specifically for technical writing. And so it's really great that we have somebody who's out there advocating for us tech writers. Okay, and before I get started on anything, I just want to give credit where it's due. I just want to thank all the amazing presenters from STC for sharing their insights about generative AI at the summit. Emily Laird, Jason Kaufman, Jill Stanton, Rob Hanna, Susan Kelly, and Arthur Berger were all either on panels about AI or they presented their own, different presentations about AI, and I learned a lot from them. Emily and Jason were 2 of the specific presentations that I attended that I thought were really helpful. So if you find any of the guys on LinkedIn, I definitely recommend you follow. And they are great people kind of talking specifically about AI and technical writing. So what we're going to go over today is we'll start by talking about how to get Gen AI to work for you with some key learnings on prompt engineering. Then we'll talk about what Gen AI can do for you using some generative AI use cases. These will be specific to technical writing, but there will be a few that are just more broad, general uses of generative AI. And then working as a Gen AI team, so adopting generative AI governance. So get Gen AI to work for you. Key learnings on prompt engineering. We're going to start by going over some basic vocab. So first of all, there's prompt engineering, which is the process of refining a prompt over time to enhance its effectiveness. And then we also have a prompt framework, and this is methods of structuring instructions to a language model. There's at least 77 different types of frameworks. There's probably more since I grabbed that number. That was probably like a month ago. And we're going to go into more detail on them later. But what you need to know now is just that prompt engineering is basically just refining your ability to effectively produce the desired output from a language model. So what you're going to want to do is use the outputs that you get from ChatGPT or whatever you're using, and then refine your inputs using those outputs and try to figure out like where you went wrong. This is really all prompt engineering is. It's just you working with your tools to figure out the best way to get your desired output. And the best prompts are going to make it look like you wrote it. I haven't exactly made this, a reality for myself yet. I'm still working on it. But it would be really cool if you could just, have it help you and truly be able to speak in your voice. I know there have been several times when I've asked ChatGPT to come up with something and I'll put it in a document. And then when I come back to it later, I'm like, that sounds like ChatGPT wrote that. That does not sound like Allison wrote that. And so I think there's probably some ways if you're, using prompt engineering in the right way where you can maybe get it to get closer to yourself. Okay, and then we also have token, which is a basic unit of text used in language models. And words can be broken into subwords. So I asked ChatGPT to break this sentence into its tokens, and it actually broke up into and subwords for some reason. And so that's just something to keep in mind, that token doesn't necessarily mean character count or word count. It is kind of closely correlated to word count, but as you can see, like there's the commas will get their own kind of token, as will some words will get broken up. So token doesn't exactly mean word count, but it's pretty close to word count. And then there's context window, which is the amount of text that a model can consider at any given time. And this is actually going to include all three of these: your prompt, the model's response, as well as the preceding conversation. And so basically what context window means is just how much the text the model can consider simultaneously. And it determines how much information the model can keep in mind at once. So let's say you have a token limit of like 4,000 tokens. If the prompt uses 3,000 tokens, it only has, if your prompt uses 3,000 tokens, then the model only has 1,000 tokens left for the response. Most models do not use that small of a token. For example, ChatGPT 4o, the context size is 128,000. And that's about 350 double-spaced 12-point font pages, like those ones that you used to write for your professor back in college, which generally have about 300 words per page. So if you want to try to conceptualize like how much content that is, it's a lot of essays that you wrote in college. So the key takeaways for context windows is that models may forget older parts of conversations, and there is a limit to how much content you can provide. So this is something to keep in mind. I know that I have really long conversations, like this grammar checker that I use in ChatGPT, and I didn't realize this, but I have a feeling that it's probably forgotten like all of my older conversations that I've had with it in the past, and it's, you know, just working off of newer data now. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that you may want to be updating your conversations and starting new conversations rather than keeping the same one going for an extended period of time. And then there's also going to be a limit to how much content you can provide. So now we're going to get into frameworks. I mentioned this before, but one of the examples of frameworks that they talked about a lot, because I think a lot of people use it for technical writing, is the Tracy framework, which is an acronym for task, role, audience, context, and intent. And so basically you're going to want to write your prompt using these key ingredients to make sure that you get a good output from the generative AI model. So for a task, you would tell it to like write a doc about something. For the role, you would tell it what role to play. So like as an expert in technical writing or low-code development, something like that. And then for the audience, you'll tell it who it will be used by. We all know how important audience is in technical writing. And if you provide that to the model, they should be able to give you a better result. And then context is probably the most important thing, where you just want to tell it like what it's going to be used for, any constraints that you want to put it under. Maybe there's like certain words that you wanted to avoid. And this is going to be the thing that you probably forget most of the time, but can be the most important for getting really good results. So you also have the intent, which is basically telling you what the purpose of the doc is. And so when you put all of these together, you get something that looks like this. As an expert technical writer, draft a brief overview to inform users of a new data export feature. This overview should be clear and concise, targeting low-code developers who are already familiar with Appian. Highlight the ease of use and key benefits of being able to export data in multiple formats. This content will be included in our user manual and on our support website. So, can anybody guess? Go ahead and put it in chat what you think the task is in this. Go ahead and get those fingers ready. I want to see some answers. What do you think the task is in this prompt? So Melissa says, write content for the user manual plus support website. Okay. Anybody else? Draft a brief overview to inform users of a new data export feature. Draft a brief overview, draft a brief overview. Okay, yes. Draft a brief overview, just that one simple sentence. There is the task. That's all you need to do for the task. How about for the role? This one should be pretty easy. Yes, expert technical writer. Okay, and so I'll show you how I broke down the rest of this. And you guys might come up with different ideas of what context is versus intent, but I basically said that as an expert technical writer is the role, draft a brief overview is the task. The intent is actually to inform users of a new data export feature, as well as highlighting the ease of use and key benefits. The audience is going to be low-code developers. They're already familiar with Appian. And then the context is going to be being able to export data in multiple formats and telling it where it's going to be. So that's a basic framework breakdown. And like I said, there's 77 different frameworks. So these are some of the other ones that they said were good for technical docs. This came up in one of the panels, I believe it was, where they just gave us a list of the ones that people tend to use for technical documentation. I did not fact check these acronym definitions. I just put them in ChatGPT. I'm like, tell me what these mean. And ChatGPT usually makes things up. So just a caveat there. But yeah, so instead of doing the Tracy model, you could do something like goal, request, action, details, and examples. And then there's actually other techniques that you can use for doing prompts with AI. So one of the examples is zero shot. So prompt that doesn't provide any examples or background. So you want to be really clear with this one. This is usually what a lot of us probably start with. But you want to be clear, like rather than saying just who is the king, you probably want to say the king of what? The king of England, maybe. So be more specific rather than just saying who is the king, say who is the king of England. And then there's also one shot where you give it one example. And so think of this as like showing someone how to do a task once and then expecting them to replicate it. And then there's also few shot, which is give it multiple examples before posing the main query. So that's just a little bit more examples than the one shot is, but you might be able to get a better result if you do that. And then there's also chain of thought. And this is something where you're just stringing together prompts. And I feel like this is the way that a lot of us interact with, ChatGPT already. And it's kind of nice because it actually mirrors the way that we approach problem solving by breaking down complex tasks into manageable steps. And so that's actually what we're doing when we're doing this kind of chain of thought prompting, where we're kind of guiding ChatGPT or whatever it is through a scenario. And it can also help us understand where things are falling apart and how we're failing as prompters. So that's one of the things that, prompt engineering is how to identify things that you could be doing differently to get a better result. And chain of thought prompting can be really good for that. Okay, I actually took this straight from Emily Laird's presentation because I thought that it was such a good explanation of the things that you need for a prompt and just taking it completely out of the framework discussion. So this isn't necessarily a framework here, but these are like all the different things that you want to have in a prompt. And I found that I actually do most of this kind of naturally. So, for context, you're going to be providing relative background information to guide the model's responses. You're going to give it instruction, which has clear and precise directives that outline the specific task or action the model should execute. You have data input, which is supporting data that helps the model generate accurate and contextually relevant responses. And then you have output indicators, which indicate the expected format or type of output to shape the model's response. So this could be like an example or something like that. I feel like I naturally do this in a lot of my prompting. And so even if you don't want to learn all 77 models or, figure out your favorite model to use, as long as you're including these things in your prompt, you're probably going to be pretty close to good. Okay, so now we're getting up to the tips for prompting. So the first tip is to be clear and concise and don't create any ambiguity. So for example, don't tell it too much and also be specific and literal. One of the things that Emily was really good about talking about was the fact that you don't want to be a weirdo. If you just walked up to a stranger and told it your entire background and life history and everything, they're going to think that you're a weirdo. It's kind of the same thing with ChatGPT. If you tell it too much, it's going to be like, it's not going to know what to do with that information. It's going to be too much information. It's going to confuse it, and it's not going to be able to give you a very good, concise result. And so just think about it like if a stranger came up to you and asked you the question, would you know what they were talking about? If so, then you're probably doing pretty good, and your language model is going to be able to give you a pretty good answer. The other one is let it be creative. You can use it to help you ideate, and you don't even have to tell it everything. So this is something that I do quite a bit with ChatGPT, where this is probably just me not being very good at prompting, but it actually comes up with some pretty interesting results, where I don't give it much context. I'm just like, do this thing for me to see what it does. And a lot of times it actually does a pretty good job, which blows my mind every single time, because I know in the background how everything works is, each letter and word has a number associated with it, and then there's like a probability of that number coming next and all this kind of stuff. It's really wild how it actually works in the back end, and to imagine that it can actually provide the answers to some of the questions that I ask it, it blows my mind sometimes. But it can be very creative if you let it be, and don't try to constrain it too much. Okay, the next one is to give it instructions. So you want to give it relevant background information and parameters. So this could be examples of like what voice and tone to use, what format to use, or what reading level to use. And then you can also give it constraints. So you want to tell it what you want it to avoid. For example, the overused terms like harness and delve. One of the other things that Emily mentioned was that these terms have like increased in usage over like the last year, ever since ChatGPT was released and started being used very often, because for some reason it really loves these words. And so if you find these in any content that you're reading, you can be sure that ChatGPT was involved. And then you also want to think of it as a person. Just talk to it. Emily was always a really big advocate of using voice to text, and I think that's a great idea. Like, just think of it like a conversational companion where you're just working through a problem with it. And then practice makes perfect. Get good at it and use it every day. This is probably my key takeaway from the summit, is that in order to be good at this, you just need to use it every day. And it's kind of like practicing the piano. Not only are you going to get better at using AI, but you're also going to understand what it's useful for. You're going to kind of create a sort of AI intuition. And so make sure that you're practicing with it. Try to find things that you can use it for, even if it's not in your general job. I know a lot of people have a lot of constraints with what they can use in their position through their employer. But if you can't, I would say at least try using it at home for as many things as you can, because this thing is coming, and if you're not jumping on the train, you're going to be left behind. So that's really important for, I think, all of us, people who write content, to know, is that this thing is really good at writing content. We are better than it, and we can harness it to make our jobs easier. And if you don't do that, then you're probably not going to be finding yourself, at the top of the list. It's going to be a struggle for you if you don't adopt these things. So make sure you're practicing. Okay, so now moving on to the next section, learning what Gen AI can do for you. And also, by the way, make sure that you're putting any questions in chat. We're going to have time at the end to discuss all your questions. So if anything comes up while you're watching, make sure that you're letting us know. Okay, so the generative AI use cases. These are going to be specific for technical writers for the most part. So create and refine templates. You can give it some docs and ask it to create a template for you. When I heard about this one at the summit, I was like, duh, I can't believe I haven't done this. I think at my job, we haven't had a template for like how we do like our, object reference documentation and like, conceptual docs. And I've always wanted that. And it's been 5 years and we still don't have one. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we could just give it some of our docs and be like, create a template from this. And I think we're going to try doing that soon, because I didn't even think to do this for, using generative AI. And then also you can use it for grammar. It's like having an English teacher in your pocket. For example, I got this prompt from Tom Johnson a while ago, and I've been using it a lot. So the prompt says, and Dan, if you want to, you can put this in the chat so that other people can copy and paste this. But the prompt is, as a technical editor for a documentation group, you are an expert in grammar and plain language. Provide guidance about the following usage options, indicating which is better and explaining the rule behind it. Reference grammar styles and rules by name in your reasoning. So this was a prompt that I gave it a while ago, and this is the one that I just keep open, and I just ask it anytime I have a question. I'll, ask it to, tell me which one of these is better. For example, one of the ones that I gave it was to reference a site page, use a site bang domain with the structure site bang site name. And then the other example was use the site bang domain to reference a site page, which uses the structure site bang site name. It's really fun with all those bangs. Bangs is what we use, by the way, in like our low-code software. Whenever we see an exclamation point, we call it a bang because it makes it fun. So when I asked it which one of these was better, it actually pointed to the first one and said that the first sentence is better because a sentence structure is known as a fronted adverbial clause, where to reference a site page is giving the reason for the action at the beginning of the sentence, which is better when trying to write clear, direct instructions. This is something that I've always told people, like when I'm reviewing content, because it's something that somebody told me, and now it just jumps out at the page whenever I see this not being employed. And I just never knew that it was called a fronted adverbial clause. And now I throw that phrase around like nothing. And all of my, whenever I'm giving feedback to somebody, I'm like, oh no, you need to use a fronted adverbial clause. So I can be really geeky now because I actually know the right, grammar and style rule to tell them in my feedback. So moving on, you can also use it to outline or reorganize. So just basically how to organize new or existing content. It's actually really good at categorizing stuff. And so this can be a really good way to get like different ideas for how you can, organize something. And then it can also help you convert content. So maybe you want to go Markdown to HTML or HTML to Markdown, XML, something like that. And then you could also like break content into spreadsheets, charts, or bullet points. So, give it a big block of text and be like, make this into a spreadsheet for me and see what it comes up with. And as a bonus, I think you should definitely try making a style guide assistant. So if your style guide is something that you could either input into an internal tool, or if your company is okay with you putting it into an external tool, you could write a prompt or assistant that's trained on your style guide. And one of the things that I copied pretty much word for word from Jason's presentation was the most effective models are pre-trained by you with your data. And so you should make sure that the data is as clean and structured as possible using tags and keywords so that the LLM can find information. I don't know how to actually do this, but I'm sure that there's people out there who do. And that's something you should definitely consider. If you did want to create a style guide assistant, you might want to do some work beforehand to make sure that it's structured in a way that the LLM is easily able to identify stuff. Okay, so some more use cases that are for more like general use, not necessarily for technical writers, but we all know that ChatGPT can summarize like nothing else. So give it meeting notes, transcripts of meetings, your docs from your doc site, anything that you're allowed to share with it. I say, go ahead and share and ask it to summarize for you. This can, even emails, I've seen people use it with emails and that kind of thing. This can be a really good way to use it. I actually gave it my notes from the STC Summit and I asked it to help me come up with themes for the presentation. And that worked out really well. It actually gave me a really nice kind of pattern to use with some examples of, and the other thing you can do is give it a pattern and some examples of good intros and ask it to summarize documents using that pattern. So that way you can have very consistent intros for all of your documentation. So you can also use it to create or refine prompts, which is so meta because basically you're using generative AI to effectively talk to generative AI. And so this is basically, you can just create something that like your own prompt to do engineering prompts. So you can say, act as an expert prompt engineer, use the Tracy model and help me create a prompt that does this. or just tell it that you're getting weird results and ask you to help fine tune a prompt that you already created. So that's kind of a really fun way to use it in a way that it's actually really good at that kind of thing as well. You can even ask it to help you generate new policy or outline a new process. I'm actually working on a project right now to kind of refine our UX content process, and we're definitely going to be using ChatGPT to help us come up with some ideas at the very beginning of what we can do for this. And then advice. You can ask its advice on how to do something. I actually know people who've used it to ask like relationship advice and that kind of thing, and that's fun. I've never done that, but that's not the type of advice that I'm talking about. I'm talking more about like, should you split this document into 2 pages? Or what are the best practices for this type of documentation? Or what types of info should I include in my doc? I'll use this a lot for like UX content, like what's the best way to write a tooltip and that kind of thing. With these kind of things, I'm very careful not to take it at face value and, ask it for like citations and that kind of thing, so that I kind of know that the best practice that's telling me is actually a best practice and not something that made up, because it does like to do that a lot. Okay, and another bonus, your quarterly reviews, or however often you do your reviews. If you can give it like the standards that your company kind of looks at when they're doing reviews, and then give it the task that you did that quarter, and then let it help you write something about yourself that might be better than what you can write. Because I don't know about you guys, but this is my least favorite type of documentation, talking about myself. And I would love to just let ChatGPT do all of it for me forever. So I'm definitely going to try that my next quarterly review. Okay, so moving on to the next section. How's everybody doing? Hopefully, I don't see any questions, so make sure that you're putting them in chat if you have anything. And so, yeah, for anybody who's joining or who joined late, Anne is going to be collecting questions throughout the presentation, and we'll do a Q&A at the end. Okay, so working as a Gen AI team, adopting generative AI governance. This was probably the biggest part of the conference that really made me think and made me want to bring this back to my team. When they first started talking about it, it was kind of nebulous. I didn't know what they were talking about. Maybe that's what's happening to you right now. But by the end of the conference, I was like, yes, I think that there are very many things that we could do with this and that we should be doing better. So the first thing that you can have as a part of your AI governance is maybe a prompt style guide. So it's a style guide, but it's for your prompts. This can be actually, I'm going to go through these in more detail in a little bit. So I'll just go through all 4 of them first. And then you also have SOPs for using Gen AI. So how to use Gen AI tools for your work. This can be really helpful if you have any like internal tools, especially. I know we have several different internal tools kind of spread throughout the place, and I don't really know where they are or how to find them. And then you also have prompt library, where you can share your prompts and you can actually work together with your team to refine the prompts. So that's you and your team working together to create prompts that give really good outputs that you guys can reuse, and you kind of work together to make better. And then you can also use it, or you can also create Gen AI policies. And this, I think, is probably the most important, which is defining what you can and can't use it for. And then also specifying why, so that people understand like what the repercussions of, not following the policy is. So a Gen AI prompt style guide. Why would you want this? Well, it can help you formulate prompts to ensure AI outputs align with tone, style, and clarity standards. So this would be like a team document that you and your team share. And you could document things like what level of formality to use, the terminology to avoid, maybe the writing level to use. You can tell it to always give you things at an 8th grade reading level. That might help you with some of those giant blocks of text that it sometimes comes back with. And you're like, can you make that simpler? Tell it to write at an 8th grade reading level, and I bet you it would make it a lot shorter, or at least a very simple sentence structure. And so if you and your team are both using kind of these style guidelines when you're writing your prompts, then you're going to be getting content that is closer to each other, that is more consistent. Okay, and for a prompt library, One of the things that was mentioned was that you should think of prompts as content. We're really good at organizing content. Use some of those principles to organize your prompts. So you can use keys and tags and keywords to keep it organized. You can create templates for prompts. You can even develop taxonomies and categories for how to organize your prompts. And this is just a way for you and your team to, kind of use the same prompts that give good outputs, and in a way that you guys can all find and use. And one of the questions that was asked is well, where would I store this kind of information? There are tools such as structuredprompt.com or promptfolio.ai, which are both in beta, but these things will allow you to collect prompts and update them and keep them in one organized location. But one of the kind of key takeaways though was just use the tool that you're already using internally to share info. Like maybe you have a shared drive or you use Microsoft OneNote. It can be really, helpful. I'm not exactly sure how to use Microsoft OneNote, but I know there's something with, being able to tag and categorize information. So just use those tools that you're using internally and make it, really simple. Okay, Gen AI SOPs. As I mentioned before, this can be really helpful for internal tools where you can provide instructions for how to use them and maybe specify which tool is best for specific use cases. I mentioned that my company has several internal tools that we can use, but they're kind of scattered all over the place, and not all of us are aware of what to use them for or how to use them. So that's something that I would like me and my team to start looking at. And then you can also document how to ensure accuracy. This can be something that's really important for making sure that you're not using information that is incorrect. So you can ask it to cite its sources, but then you also want to review those sources to make sure that they make sense and aren't biased. And you can also actually write a prompt to fact check outputs. I just worked with ChatGPT for half an hour in very frustrating conversation with it, trying to get it to use Microsoft Style Guide for, grammar checker assistant that I was trying to create. And it just kept telling me the wrong information. So I don't know what I was doing wrong. I need to go back to the drawing board on that one, but make sure that you are kind of doing this and making sure that it's citing its sources, because it was telling me some things that went against the Microsoft Style Guide. And since I was on that page, I could verify it. So just be careful with that kind of thing. Okay, so this was something that I kind of paraphrased from the prompt engineering panel, but it really kind of stuck with me. And it's that critical thinking is the most important skill you need to hold on to. They, as an AI, are not doing your job for you. You still need to do the work to assess the accuracy. So always keep that in mind, that part of our job is making sure that when we are using generative AI to help us in our jobs and become more efficient, we're also making sure that we are keeping things very accurate. Okay, so some Gen AI policy. So like I said, this is the thing that I thought was the most important takeaway that I got from the summit this year. So one of the things that you want to think about is what types of information can you input into generative AI. And I'm specifically talking more about external generative AI, like ChatGPT or something like that. So there's style guide, voice and tone guidelines, maybe your release note guidance. How about your public documentation or internal documentation such as specs? So for me, I feel like my style guide and voice and tone guidelines should not be a problem to share with ChatGPT or something like that, because it's not really proprietary information. But our release note guidance, we write really good release notes, and it might be a little bit of a secret sauce that we don't want to share with other companies or anything like that. So uploading something like that to ChatGPT, we'd have to discuss as a team and decide whether or not it was worth it. Our public documentation, I don't see why not. It's out there in the public anyway. ChatGPT has probably already been trained on it. So I don't have any issues with that. And then, but as far as internal documentation, such as specs and feature information, that kind of stuff is probably not the greatest idea to share. And that kind of brings us to, it's going to depend on what content is already public. And if it is public, if the feature is unreleased, is there anything that you can ask about it? Or what if you avoided specific details or asked it about like just one paragraph or one sentence, and maybe you obfuscate that what type of feature is, and you just say, feature X or something like that. And then it's also going to depend on whether or not the content includes proprietary information. As far as like the specs go, like one of the things you'll have to consider is like, okay, well, this is a released feature, so I don't see a problem with sharing the spec since that's already, public, and they already know that this is a part of our product. Well, you probably want to be careful because your PM probably put some information in there about, how we made decisions. There's going to be some proprietary information likely in there. So I would avoid sharing that kind of information at all costs, even for released features. Okay, and one of the other things that they recommended is to include why the policies are important. And these can, there's a wide variety of reasons why it's important to follow these policies and make sure that you're only uploading information that you and your team agree can be uploaded. And that's because what you upload may help to train AI models. And so if you think about it in another way, that means that it could be used to help train your competitors. And it's also likely stored in a database that your company doesn't have any control over. They can't get that information back. And the AI provider may even be a competitor. Would they be able to use anything that you input for competitive intelligence? This, could be something with, internal tools that you use. If you happen to use an internal tool that also happens to be a competitor, you should be careful of this. Not that, I'm sure that their legal guidelines would tell them that they couldn't do this, but that doesn't mean that they won't. So it might just be worth it to be a little careful there. Always, consult your legal department as well when you're creating these types of policies. Okay, we're almost at the end. So I have some resources here, and Anne will put them into the chat so that you guys can get to them easily. So there's this great Coursera course called Generative AI for Everyone by deeplearning.ai. This one is free if you're just, if you're not going to go through it for the certification. And I've been doing it kind of slowly and kind of working my way through it, but it's a really good way to talk about like how to operationalize AI and use it for like your everyday tasks and that sort of thing. It does a really good overview of like what AI is and how it works and all that too. I just saw this in an STC channel about AI. The Center for Information Development Management, CIDM, is doing a survey about generative AI. And so I figured I would plug that here if any of you guys are interested in taking that survey. And actually, let me also share with you the CIDM site so that you can get more information before taking the survey. Let's see, copy. There's the information about CIDM. Okay, and then DevRelCon is coming up in New York. That's coming up in July in Brooklyn. And it's for developer relations, people who, especially if you're in learning management, I could see this being a really helpful conference for you. So they actually reached out to me with a code. So if you use the code Write the Docs, or the one that Anne just put in, that will automatically give you the code. And I will put this in the chat as well. Ooh, that's a big, ugly one. I don't want to put that one in. I'll share it a little bit later, but yeah, so that DevRelCon could be a really interesting option for some of you, especially if you're kind of working more with the developer relations team at your company. And yeah, I thought it was really nice of them to reach out and offer us a code. I did send out, if you're in the meetup group, you probably got an email about this not too long ago. Okay, so now it's time for Q&A. And if nobody has any questions, we can definitely leave early. But if you have questions, now is the time to ask them. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Maybe. I don't even know how to do this. Oh, Misha. Misha has a question. Do you have any tricks for underwritten responses from AI when it's drafting? I actually don't know what you mean at all, Misha. Please clarify. Misha and I work together. I know him, but I don't know what you mean by underwritten responses. I think I finally stopped sharing my window. Is that true? Awesome.
Can I just ask my question
Yes, you
live?
may. Please do.
Okay.
Oh yeah, if anybody wants to come off camera or turn on your microphone as well, you can feel free to ask questions that way.
So I recently tried to use AI to more quickly get through the generation of a new set of content for a very niche product, something not well represented in its training data. And it did not write document, no matter how much time I spent finagling with the prompt, it continued to underwrite responses, providing extremely thin drafts that don't resemble the type of well-written, thorough user documentation. No matter how much material I fed it. Did you have any? Have you come up with any tricks? I ended up just writing it all myself. Do you have any tricks for getting the volume to be right, to get it to be at the right level?
So in that case, it kind of sounds like since your product was really niche, oh, Misha, come back. I want to talk to you. But because your product's really niche, it's probably more because it didn't have the right data to train it on. So if you could use like an API or something like that, where you could actually upload the information that you have about the product and then ask it questions after that, you might get a better response. But usually what I'll say to it when I want it to be less loquacious is I will just say, make that shorter, please, or, please just one paragraph, 2 sentences, whatever I actually want. Yeah, so Susie and Jennifer kind of saying the same thing about just telling it how much content you want. I'm sure that you were probably doing that, but it was still kind of being finicky. But I have a feeling it probably had more to do with the fact that it just didn't know what you were talking about. It thought you were a weirdo. Any other questions? We could totally get out of here early. I am all up for that because it's been a long week. Okay, and I know that a lot of you were first-time joiners, so welcome to Write the Docs DC, and I hope that you can attend some of our sessions in the future. Try to have quarterly sessions. Some of them will be in person, but we will also do these more webinar type events so that people from anywhere can join. And I really hope to see you guys at the next one. Thank you very much for joining.